The man was just trying to take a picture with the polar bear's body when he was suddenly bitten hard by something. Looking at the insignificant wound on Bart's arm, Adam said it wasn't a big deal, thinking it was just a flea bite, and reassured Bart not to worry. Then they left the lab, but by midnight, Bart's wound became unbearably itchy. He couldn't sleep at all and couldn't stop scratching his arm, even as it became raw and bloody. Although Bart suspected it wasn't a flea bite, he didn't take it seriously and just bandaged it up with some gauze. However, by the next day, not only had Bart's arm not improved, but the oozing blood had stained the gauze red. When he unwrapped it, he found that the wound had worsened. When they returned to the lab, they discovered something even more horrifying. The corpse of the polar bear had severely decomposed, and it was crawling with a type of insect they had never seen before. Seeing this, Bart panicked, realizing that his arm must have been infected by these insects. In a rush, Bart went to the kitchen to see if he could salvage the situation. When he reopened the bandage, he found that the wound had become pus-filled. Wincing in pain, he used a small knife to cut open the skin, and to his horror, he saw insects still wriggling inside. To save his own life, Bart made a bold decision. This horrifying tale of insects actually begins a few days earlier. In the frigid Arctic, Dr. Crouppen and his team spotted a polar bear that was feeding. At Croupen's signal, his assistant immediately raised a tranquilizer gun, ready to bring the polar bear back to the lab for study. Unexpectedly, instead of falling, the polar bear charged at them vigorously, scaring them into retreating. But moments later, they realized the polar bear hadn't charged. Approaching cautiously, they discovered that the tranquilizer had taken effect. While they were discussing around the polar bear, Nudie noticed that what the bear had been feeding on was actually the corpse of an ancient woolly mammoth. Compared to the current polar bear, the mammoth's corpse was clearly more valuable for research, so they transported the polar bear's body back to the base and immediately set up a tent at the original site. The appearance of the mammoth's corpse evidently signaled that the globe was warming. To raise awareness of the severity of the issue, Crouppen even invited students from the university to visit, including his daughter Evelyn. But just after hanging up the phone, Nudie informed Crouppen that the polar bear had mysteriously died. Subsequent research suggested that the death of the polar bear might be related to the mammoth's corpse, possibly due to an ancient virus. Concerned for his daughter's safety, Crouppen immediately called Pilot Bart to stop Evelyn from going to the Arctic, though he did not divulge much about the reason. Soon, Bart and his group were ready to leave. Seeing Evelyn arrive, Bart immediately followed Croupen's instructions to stop her, conveying his words to her. But the rebellious Evelyn wouldn't listen, because Crouppen was often busy with work, neglecting Evelyn and the entire family. He had even missed his wife's funeral. This led to Evelyn harboring resentment towards her father, naturally making her disinclined to heed his advice. Ignoring Bart's attempts to stop her, Evelyn determinedly boarded the helicopter. Seeing no alternative, Bart could only pilot the helicopter, taking Evelyn along to the Arctic. Little did they know that a terrible event was unfolding back at the base. The unknown virus had infected Nudie, who in agony, chose to end his own life with a gun. Jane was bedridden, but at that moment, she faintly heard Crouppen and Edward plotting something outside. Soon after, Jane experienced symptoms of vomiting. When Edward came to the tent, Jane immediately asked him what secrets were being hidden, but Edward silently walked away. From Edward's evasive eyes, Jane sensed something was amiss. Meanwhile, Evelyn and her group arrived at the base, but since Crouppen and others were still at a temporary camp in the wilderness, the base was deserted at the moment. As soon as Evelyn's group entered the base, they smelled the stench of rotting flesh, and the electrical system was also malfunctioning. Bart guessed there was a problem with the generator, so he went to the engine room to make repairs. The rest of the group started to explore around. The moment the lights in the base came on, Evelyn and Adam had just reached the lab, and the sight of the polar bear's corpse startled them. It appeared the foul smell was coming from this polar bear. Bart, seeing the polar bear for the first time, couldn't resist taking a selfie with it, but he was bitten by something. However, they dismissed it, thinking it was just fleas from the polar bear, and then they left the lab. Because her father had not returned for a long time, Evelyn continuously called out on the walkie-talkie. At this time, Edward was dealing with Nudie's body, and Jane, hearing Evelyn's voice over the walkie-talkie, quickly picked it up to ask why Evelyn was there. But Evelyn just wanted to talk to her father. Knowing that his daughter had still come to the base, Crouppen simply told her not to wander around but still did not disclose the specific reasons. Jane, observing all these strange actions, couldn't help but suspect they were secretly planning something, because before the virus was discovered, she had specifically instructed Krupa not to let anyone come over, as the virus was highly contagious and the consequences of infection could be unimaginable. But now that students and Evelyn had arrived, although Jane did not know what they were planning, she sensed danger. So, when Krupa returned to the tent, Jane decisively picked up a shotgun and pulled the trigger. Hearing the gunshot, Edward rushed over but was also shot down by Jane. After dealing with them, Jane rode a dirt bike back to the base overnight. Evelyn, who was sleeping, heard the engine sound and hurried out to check. But apart from the parked dirt bike, she saw no one. It wasn't until she opened the nearby helicopter that she found Jane, barely alive. At Evelyn's shouts, the others, jolted from sleep, immediately woke up and helped bring Jane inside. However, at this moment, Ling was horrified to discover that many unexplained red spots had suddenly appeared on her face. After they got Jane to bed, Evelyn immediately used the walkie-talkie to call the camp but received no response. Realizing something might have happened at the camp, Evelyn hurriedly explained the situation to everyone. Federico also realized something was very wrong. His girlfriend Ling, who was fine yesterday, was now covered in red spots for some reason. Federico thought they should leave immediately to get Ling and Jane to a hospital for treatment, but Evelyn couldn't just leave like that. She had to find her father. Bart also suggested they could use the GPS on the off-road vehicle to pilot the helicopter to the wilderness camp to figure things out. If an uncontrollable situation really arose, then they would leave. They all agreed to this proposal. At that moment, Adam discovered a camcorder on Jane's body, but oddly, the film inside was missing. Without delay, the group immediately set out to head to the camp. However, when they arrived at the helicopter landing site, they found that someone had tampered with the helicopter, clearly Jane's doing. Jane seemed intent on preventing anyone from leaving the place. Learning that it would take hours to repair the helicopter, Evelyn had no choice but to drive to the camp in the off-road vehicle. Just then, Ling rushed out to inform everyone that Jane's condition had worsened. When they returned to the room, they found Jane struggling in agony, vomiting a disgusting mucus. However, they were helpless in the face of this situation. With her last bit of consciousness, Jane finally spoke, apologizing while telling Evelyn that no one should be allowed to leave. Before Evelyn could ask for specifics, Jane had breathed her last. In a moment of desperation, Evelyn was about to perform mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on Jane but was timely stopped by the others. It was clear from Jane's appearance that she was infected with some virus. To prevent contagion, they immediately isolated the body. Jane's death made Evelyn even more worried about her father's safety, so she hurriedly took Adam and headed for the camp. They soon reached their destination, but when they entered the tent, they did not find Evelyn's father. Instead, they saw the ancient mammoth's corpse. While they were amazed, they also discovered something terrible. The mammoth's body was covered in wriggling eggs. It seemed that global warming had caused the eggs and the mammoth's corpse to thaw together. Clearly these eggs were the culprits infecting them. They continued to search for Evelyn's father, but just as they stepped out of the tent, they saw Edward's body nearby. However, they searched the entire camp and could not find any trace of Krupa. Upon seeing a fresh mound of earth nearby, Evelyn panicked, thinking her father was buried there, and frantically tried to dig it up. Concerned about Evelyn getting infected, Adam had to pull her away forcibly and hurried her back to the base. Meanwhile, Federico, who was urinating at the base, also showed signs of abnormality, as he urinated blood and experienced sharp pains. However, Federico blamed Ling, thinking her infidelity had led to his infection, but at that moment, Ling showed the same vomiting symptoms as Jane, and seeing this, Federico rushed to comfort her, realizing that things were not so simple. Soon, Evelyn and Adam also returned to the base. Faced with Bart's inquiries, Adam reported that everyone was dead, but Edward had been shot, apparently by Jane. What exactly was Jane trying to do? They returned to the base puzzled just in time to see Federico using the radio to call for help. Meanwhile, a grief-stricken Evelyn suddenly had a realization and hurried to the room where Jane's body was isolated. Despite Bart and Adam trying to stop her, Evelyn forcefully opened the door because she needed to confirm if Jane's death was related to the worm eggs on the mammoth. When Evelyn lifted Jane's clothes, she indeed found many eggs on her body and, upon closer inspection, a newly hatched larva hiding in Jane's eye. At that moment, Evelyn understood that it was these insects that had bitten Ling, causing the abnormalities in her body. They were not ordinary eggs but ancient parasites. A bite meant being parasitized. Realizing the severity of the situation, they quickly wrapped Jane's body securely and moved it to a more secure lab for isolation. On the polar bear's body, Evelyn also found countless eggs. The consequences would be unimaginable once these eggs hatched. Just then, Federico arrived at the lab, announcing that he had contacted a rescue helicopter via radio, which would arrive in a few hours. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Only Evelyn looked worried, pointing out that they should have contacted the CDC instead of a rescue team. The extent of the parasite's danger was evident, as many had already lost their lives because of them. At that moment, Evelyn finally understood the words Jane had said before dying, and why Jane had tried so hard to prevent everyone from leaving. If the parasites reached densely populated cities, it would be a disaster for humanity. Evelyn suspected that Ling and Bart were also parasitized, so everyone who came here had to be isolated. Hearing this, Federico panicked, realizing he might also be infected. However, Federico chose to hide this. He could not accept the reality and wanted to leave alive. So, when Evelyn was about to use the radio to stop the rescue team from coming, Federico followed her and used a shotgun to destroy the radio. Federico declared that he was in charge now, and before the rescue team arrived, no one was allowed to make any moves. Just then, Ling staggered over, her condition severely deteriorated, and she began to vomit disgusting mucus. Her symptoms were almost identical to Jane's before she died. They quickly helped Ling into a room to isolate her. When Evelyn lifted Ling's clothes, she saw that Ling's abdomen was ulcerated, with some eggs present. What was worse, the eggs on Jane's body had begun to hatch. Bart seemed to see his own end. He had to deal immediately with his bitten arm. He unwrapped the bandage on his arm and saw a parasite already emerging. To save his own life, Bart took out a kitchen knife and, with a determined look, asked Adam to help him. Although Adam was scared, he had no choice but to help Bart. Once everything was ready, Adam decisively chopped down with the kitchen knife, but due to insufficient force, the knife got stuck in the bone. Seeing this, Evelyn had to take the kitchen knife and finish the job. After several harsh chops, Bart's arm was finally severed, and the intense pain caused him to lose consciousness. Evelyn quickly used a cloth to stop Bart's bleeding. At the same time, Adam used fire to kill the parasites on the severed arm. They then helped Bart to the couch to rest. Evelyn had intended to open the first aid kit to further treat Bart's wounds but found her father's notes inside. Unexpectedly, her father had mastered the knowledge of this parasite and had detailed everything in his notebook. It stated that the male parasites were almost harmless, causing only a sting when biting. However, the female parasites were terrifying, as they would burrow into any creature's skin to lay eggs. At that moment, Evelyn also discovered some videotapes and guessed they must contain something useful, but Adam said the only video camera was in Jane's body bag. Although risky, Evelyn had no choice but to enter the laboratory, hoping it contained a way to combat the parasites. For safety, Evelyn wrapped herself up tightly and carefully entered the laboratory. While Evelyn was searching for the video camera, several bugs fell from the polar bear's corpse. Warned by Adam, Evelyn, who had grabbed the camera, rushed outside. Upon exiting, Evelyn quickly stripped off her clothes because she could feel something crawling on her. Indeed, a parasite had burrowed into one of Evelyn's wounds, but fortunately, Adam quickly pulled it out and stomped it dead. Despite the crisis being averted, Federico still worried there might be other parasites on Evelyn. Federico threatened Evelyn with his shotgun, forcing her to strip completely for a thorough check. But fortunately, they found nothing unusual. However, just as they were preparing to watch the videotapes, they discovered that a parasite had already entered the room. Adam stepped on it, but then they heard unusual noises coming from the laboratory. Approaching, they were horrified to see that the parasites on the polar bear's body had all hatched, filling the entire laboratory. The situation was clearly out of control. The only option now was to take refuge in the helicopter and then set the entire base on fire. Unexpectedly, Ling, who was isolated, was also surrounded by parasites, desperately banging on the door trying to get out, but no one dared open it. To calm Ling down, Bart suggested giving her a sedative. However, as Adam ran to get the sedative, Bart felt something was off with his arm. When Evelyn unwrapped the bandage, they found Bart's wound filled with eggs, indicating the eggs had spread throughout his body, and amputating his arm would be futile. Federico looked at Ling's heartbreaking plea for help and felt a little sad, but as Federico slowly approached, Ling said he was also infected, startling Federico. Fortunately, no one else heard this. To keep his own infection a secret, Federico did not hesitate to pull the trigger on Ling. They looked at Federico in disbelief. Federico, however, explains that Ling put him up to it, and she doesn't want to continue the pain. But to their surprise, the shot-headed Ling was still breathing. Bart, ignoring everything, went up and punched Federico hard. Bart knew he was beyond saving, so he picked up 2 sedatives and walked into the room. Locking the door behind him, he sat beside Ling to accompany her on her final journey. The remaining three took the opportunity to leave. Before leaving the base, they had to ensure that no one was parasitized. Federico panicked upon hearing this and immediately ran out the door. His unusual behavior led Evelyn to suspect that Federico had been infected by a parasite. Federico was furious and points a shotgun at them, saying that he just wants to live, and if anyone tries to stop him, he won't be merciless. Unexpectedly, a gunshot suddenly rang out, and Federico's head exploded. It turns out to be Krupin, who survived. Jane's shot had only hit Krupin's shoulder. Seeing her father alive, Evelyn quickly embraced him and asked if he was infected. Seeing her father shake his head no, Evelyn mentioned that the base had fallen, but they had already called for help. Now, they needed to burn down the base to prevent the infection from spreading. Upon hearing this, Krupin immediately mentioned that there was some gasoline at the back of the base, so they hurried over. However, as they began pouring gasoline on the ground inside the base, Evelyn suddenly felt something was off. Her father had initially asked Bart to stop her from coming here, which proved he knew everything from the start. With this realization, Evelyn quickly opened the unfinished box of videotapes and finally learned the truth from the video. Krupin had devised a bold plan since discovering the parasite. Having worked in biological research for years, he was well aware of the irreversible damage that human development had inflicted on the Earth's environment. He had repeatedly urged people to cherish the Earth and reduce the exploitation of its resources, but his pleas went unnoticed. Now, with the polar ice caps melting, the ancient parasites frozen within had reawakened. This way, humanity would inevitably face its end, and animals would suffer too. To prevent such tragedies, Krupin had deliberately allowed a parasite to infect him, planning to return to densely populated urban areas to spread fear. Although this would lead to the death of most humans, it was the most effective way to awaken people to the crisis. Only through sacrifice could humanity learn not to continue the endless destruction of the Earth's environment. Jane had discovered Krupin's plan and thus chose to shoot at them. While they were engrossed in the video, Krupin suddenly appeared outside and threatened them to hand over the tapes. Although Evelyn understood her father's good intentions, she thought his methods were too extreme. There might be a better way without such a great sacrifice, but with his mind made up, Krupin locked the door, disregarding his daughter's safety. Just then, the rescue helicopter finally arrived. Krupin quickly got on the helicopter, lying that the others were already infected and urging the pilot to take off quickly. The pilot didn't think twice, but as they were about to leave, Evelyn and Adam broke a window and escaped. Seeing the helicopter taking off, Adam bravely grabbed onto the landing gear. Adam desperately tried to tell the pilot that Krupin was the infected one, but the noise was too loud for the pilot to hear. Ultimately, Adam fell from the landing gear due to exhaustion, hitting the ground hard. Seeing this, Evelyn completely lost hope. To stop her father's plan, she had to make the painful decision to kill her own kin. So Evelyn picked up a shotgun from the ground and aimed at the helicopter. After a few shots, the helicopter's windshield shattered, and the pilot's neck was hit by accident, causing the helicopter to lose control and crash directly into the base. A massive explosion followed, and all the parasites inside were destroyed. Unfortunately, Adam died soon after due to severe injuries. Alone, Evelyn picked up the videotapes and notes and hid in the unrepaired helicopter, waiting for the next rescue. After an unknown amount of time, 2 helicopters appeared above the base and took the unconscious Evelyn back to the city. Evelyn planned to continue her father's unfinished mission in her own way, but what everyone didn't know was that once Pandora's box was opened, it could not be closed. The disaster was set to continue because, apart from the polar bear, a crow had also pecked at the rotten flesh of a mammoth. The crow carried the parasite to the outskirts of the city, where its body was chewed by a dog that followed its owner's car towards the city.